The SQE is an incredibly hard exam, and the data backs it up. 3/5 of people who sit this will fail.
Who made this? Why have they done it this way?
They went out with a consultation to the profession. Over 80% of people said, this is a terrible idea. And so the SRA took that and they just ploughed ahead, regardless of what everyone said.
Kaplan's been fined £360,000. Sounds like a lot of money. Not when you understand that Kaplan is making 48 million a year from this.
Kaplan used to run a law school and they were the worst option and they had to close down. Now they're this sole exclusive provider locked in for years with the SRA. The SRA is not doing a great job as a regulator. The SQE is proving to be a bit of a failure in terms of its objectives.
You've paid a huge amount of money and you still may never make it as a lawyer. There is so much false hope.
Today I sit down with James Richardson, former Silver Circle lawyer, head of legal at Cuvva, and co-founder of the Law Student Academy. In this episode, James tackles a very taboo topic head on. The SQE, the exam every future solicitor must now pass, promised cheaper, fairer, more accessible legal education. The fallout tells a very different story. Pass rates have plummeted, costs are soaring, and future lawyers are being swallowed by it. James built the resources to catch them. This is a conversation no one is saying out loud. A note on accuracy. Figures on Kaplan's revenue from the SQE contract in this episode are our own estimate based on current public candidate numbers and figures, not a confirmed company figure. On the SRA's original SQE consultation, a clear majority of respondents who took a position were opposed, rising to over 80% among academic respondents specifically.
So, James, you have founded the Law Student Academy, and this business essentially has grown out of the omnishambles that we call the SQE. Now, on your website, you go straight to the pain point of this. You say, the SQE is arguably the most challenging exam that future lawyers have ever faced. The content can be incredibly complex, whilst the sheer volume challenges even those with the greatest memories. Unsurprisingly, too many bright, engaged future lawyers are failing the SQE, and even those who pass often feel uncertain throughout. SQE resources are fragmented, rarely exam true, and often incomplete, misleading, unreliable, and expensive.
Yes, that's right. I think in a nutshell, that's it. I mean, the SQE is an incredibly hard exam, and students have been saying this for some time, and the data backs it up. So pass rates are actually falling for the SQE. So in July last year, the lowest ever pass rates were recorded, 41%. So that means that 3/5 of people who sit this will fail. And that's astonishingly hard exam when you consider the previous routes, which included the graduate diploma in law and the legal practice course, among others, had a much higher pass rate, more like, say, 70% pass rate. And I think the theme with the SQE as a whole is that the SRA set out to achieve a load of objectives, all very worthwhile objectives about increasing access to the profession, but those haven't been achieved. I think ultimately the SQE is proving to be a bit of a failure in terms of its objectives. So if we step back and look at those, a decade ago, the SRA said, okay, legal education is very expensive. We've got people going on these courses with the likes of the University of Law and BPP, and they're paying between £7,000 and £14,000 for a GDL and then an LPC course. If they haven't already done the LLB, then they'll just do the LPC course. And they said, okay, we'll bring in this new course and it'll be much cheaper because there'll be one centralized assessment and everyone can sit that. And well, guess what? You still have to learn a vast amount of law. And yes, you can sit there and you can self-study, but really people need all the help they can get. So they need access to really good quality resources. And a lot of the time, people are just paying to go on the same kind of courses they would have gone on before. So BPP, ULaw, and all these other law schools, along with new ones that have sprung up, are offering very similar materials again. But the cost now is enormous still. So you'll pay again thousands and thousands of pounds for these courses. And then you have to pay Kaplan entry fees just to sit the exams of nearly £5,000 for both SQE1 and SQE2. So I don't think the SRA has achieved its objective of making it cheaper or better value. It also seems to have made it much harder, and harder in this really weird way that it doesn't actually reflect what it's like to be a lawyer. So if you look at the SQE1 exam, now that's a load of multiple choice questions. You've got 5 possible answers, one of which is the single best answer, and the others are kind of plausible, but a bit distracting and not quite right. And that just does not reflect what a lawyer does. If you're working as a lawyer, you will not have a client come into your office and say, I've got this problem. I've identified 5 possible answers and I want you to pick one. That's just not what being a lawyer is, right? Like, you have to reason things from first principles. So people aren't being trained or taught or educated about how to actually approach and analyze from scratch a legal issue. But still, even though that sounds kind of like not what a lawyer does, it's still really, really hard, because you have these exams and they mix up over 2 FLKs, functioning legal knowledge syllabi, and they mix up all these questions. So you go in and you have a question and you'll have 90 seconds to answer a question on criminal practice, and then you have one on trust law, and then you'll have one on civil litigation, and it just goes on and on like that. And it's incredibly hard to do. So no wonder loads of people are failing. But you've also got this exam which doesn't really teach to the reality of what it's like to be a lawyer.
My head actually genuinely hurts hearing you say that. This idea that you've got these multiple choice questions, as you say, no one's ever going to walk into your office and say, here are 5 potential answers, which one is it? All of which are probably very similar but slightly different. And also, to the second point you just said there, never would you have to answer a question on criminal and then wills and trusts. This whole thing just... Who made this? Why have they done it this way?
I think that's a very fair question to ask, and I think there's a lot of odd questions about why the SRA has done this. Now, a lot of people have some strong opinions on the SRA, and I think there's a lot to be said there. But if we just focus on the kind of the educational aspect, so about a decade ago, there was a director at the SRA who decided, okay, legal education's broken, we need to fix it, and it wasn't that broken. It had some problems. Could have been improved. They picked a way they were going to do it, and they just ploughed ahead regardless of what everyone said. So they went out with a consultation to the profession, and law firms answered it, individual solicitors answered it, academics answered it, law school providers answered it, and overwhelmingly, over 80% of people said, this is a terrible idea. You shouldn't be doing this.
Wow.
And so the SRA took that, and it's quite amazing. You can read the way they kind of answered that consultation. They sort of put all that criticism where, 80% of people said it's a bad idea as a bit of a footnote. And they said, there's strong demand among the public for a centralized exam. Well, is there? And if so, why did none of them answer the consultation? But they decided to go ahead anyway. So they sent out another consultation. And rather than saying, we hear your concerns that you all think the SQE is a bad idea, do you think we should still do it? Rather than doing that, they said, we're going to be doing the SQE, and do you think it should cover these kind of things? So they completely ignored it, ploughed on, and decided to do the SQE anyway, even though everyone said to them over several consultations, this is not a great idea. And guess what? It's turned out to not be a great idea. We've already got the figures on costs we've already talked about. We've already got the fact that it doesn't reflect what it's like to actually be a lawyer. We've already got the fact that the pass rates are really low and they're falling. They're getting worse. It's a really hard exam. And also, you look at diversity as well. The SRA said, this will be great for diversity. If we have this centralized exam, it'll really, really help. Now, it might help with gathering centralized data and figures. And I accept that. That's a good point. But has it improved diversity? No, it hasn't. Even last week, the SRA released data on diversity. And they said that around a third, I think it was 35%, around a third of the candidates taking the SQE are non-white. And that is sort of fluctuated up and down over, a roughly similar amount over previous sittings as well. And that's good. That's good that it's encouraging people to come forward and take the SQE. There may or may not be a causal link there. There may have been a similar number taking the LPC. We don't really know. But the point is, it's not making any difference to the profession. You've got all these people sitting this incredibly hard exam, and loads of them are failing. And you're far more likely to fail if you do not look like me, basically. If you're not just a white man with a good education from a good university, for example, your pass rates are much lower. And I don't like that fact at all. I mean, that's terrible. But the SQE isn't making any difference to that. It's not making it better. And the SRA said it would. But if you look at access to the legal profession, well, ultimately, demand for the number of trainees or apprentices or paralegals or other kinds of junior lawyers that these firms take on is a matter of market forces, supply and demand. If you change an exam to make it multiple choice questions, why is that going to increase diversity in the profession? Like there's no link between the two, right? And it hasn't. It's not working.
Just pausing for a second to ask a small favour. This is a brand new podcast, and every follow, review or share helps more than you know. It means I can create more episodes, bring on more top guests and thought leaders, and share the secret lessons and tools that help you build influence, find purpose, and create a career and life you actually jump out of bed for. If that speaks to you, please hit subscribe. It really does make a difference. Now, back to the episode.
So this makes absolutely no sense to me. And one other factor here is that the LPC was an exam that you took before you did your training contract, essentially. The SQE is meant to be an exam that you're taking after you've got the 2 years or so relevant qualifying work experience so that you can become a solicitor. And I've seen so many people and spoken to so many people who have got this qualifying work experience, say paralegaling in different firms, but then they're still not getting a job at the end of it. So let's say you even pass the SQE, let's say you get through all of these hurdles, actually you've paid a huge amount of money and you still may never make it as a lawyer.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, at least under the old system, you knew that the first thing you had to do was get one of those training contracts. I mean, they're like gold dust. But if you got one, you know then what the next few years look like. And you can choose whether you go ahead without a training contract and take the gamble of paying for a course or not. But now with the SQE, you're getting a lot more people choosing to pay up front. You know, they're paying Kaplan nearly £5,000. They're paying for all these crammer courses on the side, or maybe they're going through like the full BPP and ULaw course as well. And it's a massive gamble because they're basically being told that if you do 2 years of qualifying work experience at pretty much anywhere, like, you know, that could be working as a paralegal or working as an advisor at a charity, that's going to count. But the reality is that the demand for solicitor jobs comes from the law firms. You know, if they need more people, they will hire more people. The SRA can't fix that. They can't force these law firms to hire more people. And the training that these law firms give is very different to what qualifying work experience looks like. You know, it's not nice to hear this, but if you've worked as a paralegal at a local firm or even a paralegal in a big firm, and you've just been doing essentially a very similar role, a procedural role for much of those 2 years, no law firm is going to look at you and say, right, that person is just as good, they're just as qualified as a trainee who's been through a 2-year training contract with a big firm. It's you know, it's just sadly how it is. And the SRA has kind of tried to change that, but ultimately it's just forcing students to kind of live with this false hope that if they get 2 years kind of anywhere, that's enough. Now I'm qualified as a solicitor, and they're still gambling with these huge fees as well.
And I think there is so much false hope there. What isn't spoken about widely in law still is the hierarchy, the elitism, and the fact that the big firms still want what they perceive to be the creme de la creme of students. They're not picking people based on who's got a good SQE result. They're picking them way before that point, and they are giving them the training that they want. And this then taps into all of the issues around the glass ceiling, because actually, who are they choosing from what backgrounds? And I know now we have the apprenticeship schemes. I know things are changing. There's still a lot of elitism and tendency towards privilege.
I think that's sadly very true. I think there will always be that kind of snobby or elitist and very privileged aspect in law. just kind of the nature of the profession, really, in a way. It's really positive to see steps being taken in the right direction. I think apprenticeships are actually a good idea in many respects. I think that is a positive change. But actually, there is one positive thing that I would pull out for the SQE about the qualifying work experience. So I work in-house. I'm head of legal risk and compliance for a company called Cuvva, which is an insurtech. And I have been able, since the SQE was introduced, been able to have a trainee lawyer essentially work for me, and I can train her up and teach her how to do all the different tasks. She was called Sarah. She was absolutely fantastic. And I really wanted to say, you've done a fantastic job. I really want you to qualify here. And we could do that under the SQE. So we could say, you've done a fantastic job, and recognize how good she was and how she was doing way, way more stuff than just the kind of the paralegal role we hired her for, and actually formalize that and say, okay, I'm going to sign this off as qualifying work experience. You're going to qualify as a solicitor here, and we're going to employ you as a fully fledged in-house legal counsel. And that was fantastic. And so that's a really good thing the SQE has done for the in-house route. I don't think it's made any difference to the private practice route in a kind of positive way, but for the in-house route, it's been really good to be able to do that. Really good to be able to recognize someone's achievements.
And it's great there that you were able to recognize that and then offer her a role at the end of it. I worry for juniors who don't have that job offer from the place where they trained, because other places are going to arguably look at them with skepticism and think, okay, it looks good on paper, but can I trust this?
It's true. And ultimately, there's always going to be thousands more people every year taking these exams and wanting to become solicitors than there are jobs available.
So we've got an awful lot of problems with the SQE, and we haven't even touched on all the procedural problems to do with the exams and the 175 people who were told they failed, some of whom lost training contracts back in 2024, and the shambles around the exams and IT failures and people not being allowed toilet breaks and all the rest of it. We could go on for ages. But if we're to look forward, what can we do now to improve this situation? Or more correctly, what should the SRA be doing right now to improve this situation?
Yeah, great question. I mean, legal education should be far better. Legal testing should be far better. It should be standardized. But I think also we need more oversight of the SRA itself. I mean, the SRA is not doing a great job as a regulator. A lot of lawyers won't like to say that because they're regulated by the SRA, and the SRA comes down hard on lawyers who make small mistakes. But I'm going to say it, the SRA is not doing a great job. And for the first time ever in its history, with the Axiom Ince collapse, which was just this massive fraud where loads of client money was stolen, and the SRA was just completely asleep at the wheel.
And that was the firm Ince, wasn't it? It just suddenly went under because there actually wasn't that balance of power, so to speak. It was the managing partner who also had control of the compliance and everything else, and all sorts of money disappeared to all sorts of places.
Yeah, exactly. And the SRA signed off on this. They said, one person can be the sole shareholder, the CEO or managing partner, the compliance officer for legal practice, the compliance officer for finance administration, and the money laundering officer. And that's totally fine. And guess what? He walked out the door with £65 million of client money. 1,500 people lost their jobs when the firm collapsed. It's just like total disaster. And for the first time ever, the Legal Services Board, comprised of MPs and other people who oversee the SRA, so they don't do the day-to-day regulation, but they check that the SRA is doing its job. They've issued binding directions saying that the SRA were not up to scratch in their oversight. So we've got this situation where the SRA isn't really doing a great job. And we've got a situation where they decided to bring in the SQE. They didn't have the clearest reasons for doing it. They were repeatedly told in these consultations that it's a bad idea, and it's turned out to be a bad idea, and they're still not changing track. So something needs to happen. They need to seriously change their track and stop doing this weird approach where they're just asking lawyers to answer 5 different answers for each multiple choice question on a random range of topics, rather than actual answers which set out their reasoning, which is what the LPC did. So you had like these longer form answers where you had to explain why something was happening and why you were reaching that analysis for each topic on the course as you went through. So I think they need to really change that. And also they need to look at the Kaplan contract. I don't know what went on with the Kaplan contract, but they charge something like £4,900 to do both SQE1 and SQE2. And if you have to do resittings, you have to pay even more. And that's just to sit the exams. Like, you get no education, you get no training for that. You're paying a huge amount of money just for some exams.
That you might be told you wrongly failed anyway,
Yeah.
and there might be IT failures and all sorts of
Yeah,
different
and
things.
Kaplan's really like messed up quite a few times, like you say.
And Kaplan's been fined, I think, in total £360,000. Sounds like a lot of money when you throw that figure out there, not when you understand that Kaplan is making 48 million a year from this.
Possibly more if you add in resit fees, but you know that if students are paying up to £5,000 a year, and you've got 10,000 students to 20,000 students a year taking SQE1 and SQE2 together, then that's a huge amount of money every year. We're talking tens of millions here that Kaplan are making from this. And what I don't understand is how Kaplan got that contract, because Kaplan used to run a law school. So about a decade ago, so when I was going through law school, Kaplan were one of the law school providers, and they were the worst option. And they had to close down because they didn't get enough enrollments. And now they're this sole exclusive provider, locked in for years with the SRA, able to charge £5,000 per student to just give them an exam. How's that happened? There's something very strange that's gone on there, I think. So I think we need a much more open education system. We don't need to just be asking people MCQs and then doing some skills. And by the way, the skills are really weird. They don't reflect what it is to actually be a good lawyer either. There's sort of this almost like weird formal Victorian form of legal writing, which isn't going to persuade anyone. And that's your job as a lawyer, is to persuade people. So the SQE2 is a bit weird as well. SQE1, totally not fit for purpose. And the SRA needs to come back and reflect on that. And they need to actually listen to all of the academics, the law firms, the law schools, and the students about what makes good legal education, because at the moment we don't have it.
So we need an overhaul.
I think so. I think it needs to be reviewed properly.
This all does sound a little bit strange.
That's a very polite way of putting it.
Thanks for listening to Lawyer Unleashed. If you'd like to find out more about James and the Law Student Academy and its SQE resources, you can find the links in the show notes. And if this episode spoke to you, please hit subscribe and share with a friend who you think would benefit.